Hello, Graphic Design 1. We're going to go over how to use gradients. And our goal today is going to be to make a pumpkin. So we're going to be using this guy right over here as our example. You can kind of see that on this example illustration of a pumpkin that we have several different sizes of ovals that are all overlapping each other, and they're kind of lighter in the middle and darker on the outside of the circles. So that's going to be what we're going to be creating together. You'll notice that I gave you two artboards, one that has some circles that are provided to you, some circles and ovals, and one that's empty. So we're going to be creating our gradients over here and then making copies of them to build our pumpkin over here. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this side. And what we're going to do first is we're going to select one of our ovals. So you can see here that I have three different sizes, right? I have a large, a medium, and a small. And so we're going to make two different gradients and copy it over into the other ovals, starting with this guy. So go ahead and select one of your larger ovals, and then you're going to look down here underneath your toolbar where your fill and stroke are, and you're going to select this gradient while your fill is on top. So you can see the fill is on top here. This would be if the stroke was on top. I do not want to add a gradient to my stroke. I want to add a gradient to my fill. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this guy, which allows me to create that gradient here. The default for that gradient is white to black. So you can see here it has a gray transition because it's going from white to black. And the default is also linear, meaning it's a line for the gradient. So we're gonna go ahead and edit this to make more sense for our pumpkin. So the first thing we're going to edit is the colors. So down here on this pop-out menu, if you did not get a pop-out menu that looks like this, you're going to look where it says properties on the on the right-hand side, and you're going to look on those tools until you see one that looks like a gradient and click that to get this pop-out menu. So down here at the bottom, this is our gradient slider, and it's showing us the two colors that we can edit inside of this gradient. So if we wanted to change those colors, we would double click on the circle, and then you can either pick a color from this spectrum here, or you can click on this second icon down to choose from some swatches. So if I make this like a red-orange on one side, and then double click on the other side and make it like a yellow-orange, then I get kind of this nice transition in the middle that's a regular orange, right? So it goes from red-orange to yellow-orange with this nice regular in the middle. So the next thing I'm going to change, or that I could change, would be where the transition happens. So right now this transition between red orange and yellow orange is happening right in the middle. And I can adjust that by moving on my gradient slider this little diamond. So if I move this diamond towards the red orange, I get more of the other color. If I move it towards the yellow orange, I get more of that color. And so now moving that diamond allows me to change where the transition is happening. However, I want this, because the pumpkin is round and not square, I want this gradient to be a radial gradient instead of a linear one. So I'm going to look in my gradient panel for the second button that says radial. Go ahead and click on that, and then you'll get something that looks like this. Right? So now it's a circle coming out from the middle instead of a line going down the center. So if I remember my example that we just looked at, it's actually darker on the edges and lighter in the center. So we're going to switch this gradient by looking for this button on our pop-out right underneath the fill and stroke. So underneath the fill and stroke here, there's a button that says reverse gradient. So now it's darker on the edges and lighter in the center. The other thing that I could do here, because the radial gradient default is to be a perfect circle. So this gradient that's coming out from my oval right now is a perfect circle, not an oval. And so if I wanted to edit that gradient, I could either click on this little button here that says Edit Gradient, or I could press G for gradient on my keyboard if I want to be fancy. So now that I've done that, I get this little dotted line situation. So I've got like a dotted line going around the outside of my gradient, and the dotted line also has some circles. So there's a black circle and then a white outline circle. So this black circle allows me to change the shape of the gradient. So if I drag that up, now I can see that the black dotted line is in the shape of an oval instead of a circle. So that's the first option. The other option over here, this white outlined circle, that changes the size of the gradient. So if I make it really small, that gradient is only happening in the middle. And if I make it really big, then it goes off the edge of my shape, right? So this dotted line is where the gradient ends. So that's all that I want to change for that guy. And now I want to actually copy those gradients onto the other shapes. So I'm going to use my selection tool to select the shape that I want to edit. After I select the shape I want to edit, I'm going to do I for eyedropper and select the gradient that I want to put onto that shape. And then now I can do G for gradient and make it into an oval so that it matches better. So I'm going to do that one more time, select the shape that I want to edit with my selection tool, press I for eyedropper, copy the gradient, press G for gradient, and change the size of the gradient or the shape of the gradient so that it matches better. So that's the first one. So we've got all of our base circles here. Let's make some shadows next. So I'll zoom into the large one over here again. So let's go ahead and just copy the gradient one more time. So that way we get a base to start with. And then once you've copied that gradient, now we can change these colors. So we're going to change these to be like a brownish color to like a dark reddish color. And the other thing I want to change about this is the opacity. So right down here, opacity means opaque, which means it's not see-through, it's solid. So if I make the opacity go lower, it becomes transparent, okay? So if the opacity is at 100%, it's solid. If the opacity is at less than that, so if I make this like 70%, then that means it's 70% opaque, which means it's also 30% transparent, right? So I can do that same thing to my red. I can make the red go lower here, so maybe I'll make it like 40. So I've got like 70% on my brown and like 40% on the red. The other thing I want to change about this is where the gradient begins. So right now the gradient is in the center of that shape. I want it to begin at the top. So if I press G for gradient again, I could also just click and drag on my shape to change where the beginning of the gradient starts. So now my gradient starts at the top of my shape instead of the middle of my shape. And then I actually want it to be red on top and brown on the bottom. So I'm going to reverse that gradient. So now I've got red on top, brown on the bottom. It's transparent because I adjusted the opacity. And we're going to go ahead and copy that onto our other shapes. So I'm going to select my oval with my selection tool, I for eyedropper, copy the gradient, G for gradient, change the direction. So I'm going to go V for selection, click on this guy, I for eyedropper, copy the gradient, G for gradient, change the direction. So now we should have 3 base colors and 3 shadows. And the last gradient we're going to do together is a highlight. So I'm gonna zoom into this guy so we can see it. And we can go ahead and give it the gradient from before. So this is the same gradient we were just working with. And then over here on my gradient panel, I'm gonna add some more colors. So if I click on this circle, I can actually move that color of the gradient closer. And I'm gonna click underneath my gradient slider. You can see it turns into a little plus sign next to my mouse when I do that. And I'm gonna add 2 more colors. So I want you guys to have a total of 4 colors on this gradient. The most inside color, we're gonna change that to be a bright yellow. And then the second one, we can make it like a little bit darker yellow. And then the other 2, we're gonna change to white. Okay, so once you have a light yellow, a darker yellow, and 2 whites, we're going to adjust the opacity of those colors. So the most inside yellow, let's make that like 70%. The next yellow, let's make that like 50%. And then this white, we're gonna make like 20 or 30. And this white, we're gonna make 0. So what should happen is it should, when you click off of it without the outline showing you where the shape is, it should fade out into nothing. So again, those opacities were 70 for the center color, 50 for the next one, 30 for the first white, and 0 for the second white. So that way it fades out into nothing before it gets to the edge of your shape. Okay, now let's go ahead and build our pumpkin. So we're gonna go ahead and make copies of the bright orange. So I'm gonna hold Alt and drag to make copies of these. And then we're gonna use those to make our base, and we'll come back for the shadow and the highlight. So I want you to make 2 large circles, 2 medium circles, and we're gonna put the small one in the middle. So we're gonna arrange these in kind of like a V shape, so that way we get something that kind of looks like this. And then that's gonna be like the front of our pumpkin. So if you look at that compared to the example that I gave you, you can kind of see how we're beginning to build that pumpkin using circles. And then we also need to build the back of the pumpkin. So if we look over here, you can see that the back of the pumpkin has these 3 extra circles to make it feel 3D. So I'm gonna go ahead and make those by copying the medium and small circles. So I'm gonna go with my medium circles here, click and drag while holding Alt. And then I wanna send those all the way to the back. So right now, because they're in front, they look weird down here. But if I right click, arrange, and send it to the back, then now it starts to build that back side of my pumpkin. And I'm gonna copy the smallest one as well and do the same thing. Right click, arrange, send to the back. So now I've got the base of my pumpkin. And the next thing I'm gonna do here is copy my shadows. So I'm gonna hold Alt and copy my shadows. And then I'm gonna place those on my pumpkin. So if I click and drag this shadow over here that's the same size as my largest oval, you can see it goes behind the oval that I want it to be in front of. But the trick is I want that to be behind my medium circle, but in front of my largest circle. So I'm gonna hold Control on my keyboard, hold Control, and then use your brackets. So the brackets are next to your letter P on your keyboard, and the right bracket will bring it forwards, the left bracket brings it backwards. So if I press the right bracket, it will bring it in front of that shape, and then now I have some shadows going on that look pretty nice, right? So I can copy that guy to the other side, and then again hold Control and use my bracket to bring it forward. And then I'm going to do the same thing for my medium shape. Ooh, that one's already where it needs to go. That's exciting. So let's make a copy of it and put it over here. And then this smallest one needs to go in front of everything. So I can right click, arrange, bring to the front. Okay, so I can go ahead and do that same thing for the back side of my pumpkin, back here. So I can copy my medium ones, and then hold Control, and this time I'm sending it backwards. So I need to do my left bracket. I'm just gonna keep pressing it until it goes where I want it to. Perfect. Now copy the smallest one, hold Control, left bracket until it goes where I want it to. And then now I have a fancy base for my pumpkin that has shadows, right? So if everything's where I want it to be, I can move on to highlights. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a copy of my highlight, leaving my original over there. And then I want this highlight to be a little bit smaller. I want the highlight to be a little bit smaller, and I want it to go in between my pumpkin circles, just like I did with my shadow. So I can hold Control and press my left bracket until it goes where I want it to. And then again, I can make a copy of it. Maybe I want to make a copy from my original over here. I'm only going to put highlights on one side of my pumpkin because that's kind of how light works. It doesn't go over everything. It only will be coming from one direction. And then again, hold Control, press my left bracket until it goes where I want it to. I'll put one right here in the middle. So I get something that kind of looks like this. So at this point, we need to make a face for our jack-o'-lantern. So before we make the face, let's go ahead and group this together so that we don't accidentally move anything. So if I click and drag over all of those circles, I can group them, and then now they're going to move as one unit. So if I wanted to move this around, and you guys are going to go ahead and use your pen tool to trace a jack-o'-lantern face. So you can either trace the one that I gave you here, or you can insert a jack-o'-lantern of your own choice and trace that with your pen tool. So go ahead and do that, and then come back to this video to see what I want you to do for gradients. All right, so these are my stem and face that I traced from the examples. So you can see here that I just used my pen tool and I made myself a nice shape here for the eyes, the nose, and the mouth of my jack-o'-lantern. Now, if I were to add a gradient to this eyeball, it's gonna only come out from one direction. No matter where I move it to, it's only gonna come from one space. And if I wanna have more control, I can use a gradient called freeform. So if you look on this gradient pop-out menu, there's an option right here that says freeform. Go ahead and click on that guy. And then you're going to get these little circles inside of your shape that are the same thing as the circles that were on our gradient slider. So I could double click on these and I could change them to the color that I want them to be so that it looks like there's a candle inside of here and it's getting darker as it goes towards the edge. I could even make some parts of the gradient bigger. So if I make this guy bigger like this, then it'll be more of the orange color. And if I want to add more circles, I just click inside of the shape. And if I want to delete that circle, I click and drag it outside of the shape. So if I were going to do that again, I would select my shape that I want to edit, give it a gradient for the fill, click on freeform gradient for the type, and then now I can adjust these circles however I want. Another thing you could do is you could use your eyedropper to select the same color that you used previously. So you can select eyedropper on this pop-out menu and get that same color. So that way we get something that kind of looks like this. And then I would repeat that process for his whole face. So I would want his nose and his mouth to all have a freeform gradient that mimics the way that a candle would look inside of the pumpkin. So I want this one to be the brightest. Maybe this yellow one can be bigger. So again, your jack-o'-lantern face might look a little bit different than mine, and that is okay, but you do need to use your freeform gradient to get something that looks like there's a candle inside of there. All right, and then I could do something similar for his stem. So I could either use a circle gradient or a freeform gradient on the stem to add all of the colors that would be there. And then once you're done, so if you have your pumpkin is all arranged with the shadows and the highlights and the face and the stem, when you're done with this, you're going to export as a PNG. So we're gonna go File, Export, Export As. Going to change this to PNG, and you're going to click Use Artboards, and you want all of them, okay? So when you export this as your PNGs, you're going to get two separate artboards. You're going to get the evidence that you have your originals and your finished version. Make sure you change the resolution to high, and then you're going to press OK. And you're going to turn in both of those PNGs. So when you're done, you'll have a PNG of your original gradients and a PNG of your finished jack-o'-lantern. Make sure your finished jack-o'-lantern takes up all of the space on this last artboard, and then that's it. So feel free to use this on any projects in the future. All right, have a good day.